Hey, this is Stuchiu, and today I wanted to talk about big upsetting Astralis on Inferno at ESL Pro League Season 9 group stage. This was just a very interesting game tactically and strategically from both sides. Particularly big though because they won. And what's interesting is obviously everybody knows about the ridiculous dominance Astralis have had on this map and on Inferno. And for the record, I think their Inferno is stronger than their nuke just because of the context of everybody plays Inferno. So Astralis have had to be tactically further advanced than everybody else in order to keep this stranglehold on Inferno that like they have. So given that, I wanted to break down some of the stuff I saw in this game because I think it gives an inkling of the win conditions, the unlikely win conditions to be fair, of how you're supposed to beat Astralis on Inferno. And they're so unlikely that I don't think there's many teams that even have the ingredients to do it. And beyond that, it does show a lot of interesting aspects about Big. But I'm not going to read into it too much, just one map. But they do look a lot better from this single map I watched compared to everything else I'd seen before the Pro League groups. So it gives me some hope for Star Ladder. All right, so let's move on to the strategy part. So when I think of Astralis' overarching strategy on Inferno, you can split into two sides. That their T side is very tactical. They know how to take banana control. They know how to take top mid control. They know that they understand the timings. They kind of choke you out. Then they kind of choke you out. They play the utility game very well. And then once they've finished putting the pressure on the map, if they haven't got a pick, then they can either abuse your rotation, so like a fake, or they can do, depending on how much utility they have, they could just do a full-on execute or some variation of that. And I think their their round ordering is pretty ridiculous on this map. I think it's one of Glaive's best maps, just as a tactical in-game leader. And when you're thinking about Astralis on the T side, I think the three major players you have to consider shutting down is Glaive, and it's Glaive either as like a player or as like in terms of the utility ward, because I think he's likely the one responsible for varying the order of the utility device. Because I think generally what happens with this particular team is once they take banana control, they usually leave device to lurk there with a rifle. And so if you can take him out, then you're basically killing like half of Astralis' map presence. And then the final one is Dupree. And Dupree is like, their aggressive rifler. I think he's particularly important if you're talking about the Astralis versus Na'Vi matchup, because he needs to do really aggressive lurks deep into like Arch just to get the information of whether or not Na'Vi is gamble stacking basically. But no less important in this particular matchup. But still, I think one of the more important pieces that you're talking about their T side. Now, if you go to their CT side, I wrote an article about this. But basically, the three most important players for me on the CT side is Glaive, Device, and Magisk. And Device, because of the way he uses his op and the way the team plays around the op, gives them a lot of varying different like setups and looks and ways to get early openings or ways to hold specific areas and put them into transitional defense. With Glaive, I think he basically does a lot of the aggressive banana control. And so he's incredibly important because, banana kind of controls a lot on this map. And then the third one I think is Magisk. I think Magisk is just straight up the best pit player. So if you're going to go towards A, he's the most important player you have to take out or have a plan to take out if you want to consistently get something done on the A site. Now, if you go to Big, I don't know as much about Big because I think they were just straight up awful for the tournaments I'd seen them at with this particular lineup with Nex, when Nex replaced Smuya, right? And I wasn't really expecting much of them for at least another month, just because, language issues, the synergy, the fact that I think God B takes way longer to get a lineup together and running than that Kerrigan does. Like, you give Kerrigan like 3 days, he'll get that running instantly. But with God B, I've noticed like it takes a much longer trend with him, like 3 to 4 months usually before it really starts clicking. So I wasn't expecting much because I thought it was a bit too early in the timeline, but I guess something was working because they look pretty good here. So when I consider strategically how I'd model them without a lot of backup data, I'd say their two primary stars are Xantaris and Tabson. And the way people have described Xantaris, because I didn't watch that much Space Soldiers, is that mechanically he's really fucking good. He'll win almost all of his aim duels basically. And when I saw that the E-League premiere earlier this year with the Smuya lineup, I thought that was correct. Like, he won a shit ton of aim duels, but then after that I didn't see it quite as much, and I guess that was just like a synergy problem with the team. They couldn't communicate, so everything fell apart for a little bit. And as for Tabson, I just think he's their best all-around player in all regards. So I think he's the best. He's the best playmaker. I guess by default he's the best op, but I don't think he's that good of an op player. Like, he was pretty good here. I'll give him that. But like in general, I don't think he's that great of an op player. Like, I think there's like a hard ceiling to him. Like, he'll be good, but he won't be very good or great. And then I think he's pretty good. He's a pretty good clutch player too, all things considered. So in general, I think if Big want to win, they have to emphasize a kind of style that allows those two players to shine. And then their third win condition is actually entirely on God B, because I think God B's tactics is what makes them, this particular unit, special, unique. It's always been that way. In these God B lineups. I always think like the reason they do better than other teams around their level, even though other teams have better lineups or better skill on paper, is because God B makes them a better team. And that's both in terms of, I think, culture, and I think in terms of just raw tactics, like how he uses utility, how he orders the rounds, how he's kind of strategically playing out the game. So I think he's like, I rated him like the second best leader last year, and I think he's still one of the best leaders despite like the first bad months of 2019. Now let's get into this particular matchup. So the CZ side wasn't that interesting, but I'll go over a few specific rounds. And when I'm looking through, when I'm going to be talking about this, I'm not going to go round by round. I'm just going to give very specific rounds that I think give away kind of I guess they're the impact rounds in my mind. Like, they're the ones that kind of give away what the plan was, what both teams were trying to accomplish, and how things swayed towards Big in this matchup. So we go from round 7 to round 8, basically, and we'll start there. Astralis basically uses the same type of banana control, and in round 7, Big only had 2 players at B, so they couldn't really contest it as much as they wanted to, so Astralis won out that battle. But what was interesting is basically Astralis kind of tried to double dip that banana control, because when Astralis usually play it, like, they don't always they rarely try to go for the same kind of speed or timing. And the reason you don't do that is because a fairly competent like leader or tactical team will punish that. And that's kind of what happened here. Basically, instead of having 2 players, and they had 3, and then next is the third player, and then he basically flashes in, I think it was Tizian, around like the 1 minute 40 mark or something around there. And this timing is basically the exact same timing in the earlier round, except, they didn't have a third player in that one. So basically what I mean by that same timing is in that particular timing in the round 7, they should have known that Astralis had already taken that particular area. And so they just countered that in the following round with the flashes from next. Tizian goes in, he gets a kill, gets traded, but then Xantaris trades him, and then you're in a 1v2. Right? And this is going to set a kind of tone for the rest of the match, basically, where because both teams are very tactical, the war and utility becomes incredibly important throughout this entire match. And I'm not going to go through every round of like how they spend every nade or whatever, but there are very certain rounds where I think basically God B comes out on top. I'm just calling him God B, but I don't really know. Like maybe it's the coach, or maybe it's just the team effort. But whatever you want to say, basically Big come out on top in the utility war in some very specific rounds, and I think that's one of the particular reasons as to how they were able to beat Astralis, and that's something that we'll go into that later, I guess. And then the other thing you want to note here is in two of the rifle rounds on the CT side, basically, Device gets taken out by Zantares twice, and this is important to note actually for this entire map, because remember strategically I said Device is important for Astralis for both sides of the map. This is a really bad game for Device. I don't think he got anything going for this entire map. So because of that, like that's going to be a huge factor in this series, and it's also why in this map, it's also why I don't think this is a consistent way like Big will ever consistently beat Astralis on this map, because we'll count it at the end. But basically, if Device wins like I don't know 50% of these duels, of these impact duels, then Astralis is like 4 or 5 rounds up, and then you're at like a 16-12, 16-11 kind of score line. Maybe more depending on if it's a swing round or something. So go to the T side, and I think the T side is generally more interesting, especially when you're talking about Gabi, because I think that's when he can really flex his tactical might, right? So there's a few things to note about Astralis's CT side when you're talking about trying to anti-strat or tactically beat them. I think I can't prove this, obviously I don't have the stats, but when I watch Astralis, I think their favorite default to go to is when they take banana control, they want to leave a player there and then rotate forward to A. And then they mix up who the player they leave behind is. Usually it's Glaive or Device. And the reason they mix it up is because first off, if you just leave like Device there, then obviously they won't have to do all the necessary checks for an op on the A side. So by keeping it ambiguous like that, it just helps them in the macro strategy of how you win Inferno on the CT side. And Big basically abused this a few times. Once here in round 21, basically, where Astralis run the strat, and then Big just in the mid round they run 3 players and then just trade him out. And what's interesting here is basically Astralis are forced to use their backup plan, which is basically like, what I mean by backup plan is usually when Glaive is in that situation, he'll play a transitional defense, he'll get a kill and then fall off. But in this particular instance, he dies before he can fall off, and he isn't able to get 2 kills. Because obviously if he gets 2 kills, then that's just a win for Astralis. So it's a trade. And so what Zipnix does is he comes in, he nades the next guy, I think it was Tabson, and then the guy following after Zipnix, I forget who it was, flashes Zipnix in, and then he comes in, kills the diffuser, and stalls out. And what's interesting about this entire sequence of events is basically it shows that Astralis do have a backup plan for unforeseen circumstances, and this is also why I think they're fucking ridiculous, like strategically and tactically. Like not strategically, just pure tactically, they're really, really fucking good. Really fucking good because they have backup plans for when their players aren't playing well. So that's but in this particular instance, this setup that they're using, Astralis is using 1B 4A, that's going to bite them later on, or Big is going to abuse that later on. Let me think. The next one I think is round 23. And I don't want to go too much into depth on this one, but basically, it's worth noting that almost any other in-game leader would call for a full rifles and then less utility, because this is basically like both teams are in a weird like economic state. Like in this particular round, basically Astralis can afford all the rifles, but they can't afford all the utility. Big can afford all the utility, but if they do that, they have to get 3 Mac 10s, and then they have 2 rifles. And a majority of other teams prefer the rifles. In Big's case, they prefer the utility because I think they get way more out of the utility. And I think this kind of, I guess it depends how much credit you want to give each team as to how deeply they read into the economy and how much the other teams can buy and whatnot. Because I've never heard of an interview or a player actually giving like concrete details of how deep they go into that shit. So I don't know how much credit I'm supposed to give them when I see what's going on, or how much they could theoretically know. Because I think tracking economy that deeply is really, really hard for any player, and I don't think any star player should do it. And so it's hard for me to say, but basically what happens in this round is Astralis used the fact that they don't have a lot of utility and decide to go for an aggressive mid push where they push down Magus and Device. It's a pretty common tactic for them. They trade 1 for 2, and then Device falls back and uses like a smoke to stall anybody that's chasing him down mid, and then he tries to post up on apartments. But when he gets there, he isn't ready. He's like, when he ready is I don't think he was psychologically ready, because like you need like a second maybe to get primed for the shot. But basically, next, because he has a Mac 10, just rushes over there and like kills him, and then that's kind of the end of the round. And this one's really interesting. This one's kind of an interesting, just like minute detail, because like I said, it really depends on how much credit you want to give to each player as to whether or not Device made the right call or wrong call. Because you're basically in a, let me think, it was like a 4v, yeah, I think it was a 4v3. And so it depends a lot on what Device does here. It depends on his own confidence and whether or not he thinks the other guy has a rifle compared to a Mac 10. Because I think the movement speed is such that he'll get there in time for a rifle and get ready for the shot. But for a Mac 10, it probably just threw off his timing and then he dies. And he didn't have a molly, so he could have just mollied it and then waited for the rotation and then go for like a 2-2 split on the CT side. Just something interesting. I don't think, like, this is like one of those weird choices where I think that theoretically he should have thrown the molly, but I don't necessarily think it was a bad decision to go for that. Well, we'll see. And then when you go further, basically round 27, Tapson takes out Device again. And so basically at this point you've had like 3 duels, like 2 against Centaurus on the when Big was on the CT side, and then this one against Tapson on the T side. That kind of basically swing around in Big's favor, and it's important to note just in terms of the overall picture as to why I don't think I don't think Big can do this again, because I think if Device is just having a better day or an average day, like this is like a bad day for him. If he's just having an average day, he gets like 25 to 50% of those duels, and then Big's out of luck. But other things to note is, all right. Okay, so I talked a little bit earlier about experimentation from Astralis, and if you want to see it, I think it's around 28 and around 29. Basically, around 28, when Big take banana control, Astralis used this weird 2-man stack at top B on an alpha angle, and they kind of trade out, and then they lose that round. I just think it was really weird. It was a really weird setup because I'm not exactly certain what they were going for with that, but it's also something I haven't seen before. That's why I think there was some experimentation here. Another piece of experimentation they go for is round 29, where basically in the mid round, Dupree pushes A short, and then Magus pushes apartments at the same time. And the point of that is you get 2 aggressive duels at the same time, and this is really rare for Astralis in particular, because they like to use like one prong when they want to get aggressive. Usually that's Device. This is also why I think they like to play the numbers more than they like to go for aggressive picks like that. So I just thought that was really rare to see from them. And that's like another thing. This is something that will bite them later on in the OT. And when we go to the OT, let's see here. Right. So there's a few things we're going to talk about for the OT. First is I talked about this earlier, but basically Astralis like to default to the B for A with device on holding banana solo, and this is where I think God B kind of proves his genius is the overtime, because basically he allows Astralis to waste a bunch of their utility to take control of banana and then to control the map, and so they just what Big do is they just retake. Okay, so in the mid game, late game of a round where Astralis does this particular setup, generally what happens is the theory is you retake banana, right? And then if somebody retakes banana, then device will fall off. He'll get a chance for a free shot, maybe two, and then he'll fall back and call for the rotation from A to B. So then we have a 3-2 split. What Big do here is they do that, and then they go back to A. And because they didn't contest any kind of banana control early on in this particular round, they have way more utility than Astralis. I think it's like 9 nades, like 3 smokes, 1 molly, and a shit ton of flashes, compared to just like 1 or 2 flashes from Astralis, right? And what's genius here is, like, remember what I said strategically? You have to take out Magisk on the CT side. This is basically where Gabi kills Magus without firing a shot, because they throw the molly in pit and then they throw 2 flashes at him, and so Magus just burns alive before shooting anything. And that's basically where strategically that's how Gabi kind of takes out Magus, and then they run over the site, and that's how they win that as first round. And I want you to remember the fact that they hit A, and they hit A and they don't contest B early on, banana. Round 2, this one's basically just Tabson killing Device again. Like I said, Device is having a bad day. They follow up, and then just Big just win the round. But what's interesting here is mid-round, from what I remember, Magus and Dupree do the same mid-round aggression that they did in round 29, where, like I said, it seems experimental to me. Seems like they haven't done that before. They both push it at the same time, and then they just kind of trade 1 for 1. And that's kind of it was a bad move, I think. Actually, it's not necessarily a bad move, but it's like they were in a 4v4 scenario. So basically, when Tabson takes out Device, Dupree gets another kill. So it's a 4v4, and then they both go. And this has always been like this has always been one of my pet peeves against when you're the CT side and you're doing 2-sided aggression like that. Actually, I don't know if you want to call it pet peeve, but I just think it's dangerous. It's gambly, because basically, if you just think about aim duels in general, that's always going to be like, if you assume it's 50-50, and you trade for like, well, basically, just what happens is like you just go from 4v4 to 3v3 basically, and I think a 3v3 is much better for a T side than like a 4v4 is, but whatever. Basically, they Big win this round. They don't, and what's interesting is they don't really contest banana control, but I don't know if they were going to, but you know, Tabson just gets that kill early on Device, so I guess they weren't. And they go to round 3, and this is where basically Gob kind of outsmarts Astralis again. And what I mean by outsmarts is he calls for a very fast banana take, and he has Tabson and Tizian run into no man's land. And what I call no man's land on banana is basically like that weird area where like there's a molly in front of you, there's a molly in back of you, and you can't really move. And this is basically the point where I think Gob like really proves his tactical might, is because in OT round 1, OT round 2, he doesn't contest banana control. So basically what he's doing by that is he's trying to condition Astralis into not sending 3 players at B with full utility to really destroy B, because that particular take of banana is really basically it just straight up dies to a bunch of HEs, and that's way less likely to happen if you have 2 players rather than 3. So they take that, and then they use that to surprise Glaive to take him out, and then they it does. The rest of the game plays out. Like they take mid control, they take arch. It looks like they're going to do a B wrap, but device does the correct smoke, and then Gabi does the correct mid round calls. Like, okay, we're going back. We're going to abuse those rotations instead. They take it, and then they win. So overall, when I looked at this particular matchup, just in terms of strategy and tactics, basically 3 things happened here. Like I said, tabseN went off. He beat device twice, a few times on the op. Xantares went off. He beat device in the duels. Gabi, in terms of his tactics, I think he slightly outplayed Astralis, because I actually think Astralis tactically was really good in this matchup. But I just focused on the bits and pieces where like Big came out on top, because if I went into that, the rest of the video would be ridiculously long. But basically, I think Big was able to win out the utility war. They were able to like control it. Like I said in like the OT round 2, they had like 9 names compared to like the 2 of Astralis in the end round. They were able to abuse like Astralis's defaults and like I don't know if you want to call it crutch, but basically their favored setup on CT side. And so strategically, in order for Big to upset Astralis on this particular map, first device had to go out, and then Xantares and tabseN had to show up, and then Gabi had to tactically outplay Astralis, I think, on both sides of the map. That includes like the Banana War. Well, I guess he's not. He just think Gabi isn't actually play B, so I guess the Banana Wars, whoever is Tizian, I think Tizian does it and Xantares does it. So I guess they won that out that side, and then Gob does the other side. But for the T side, I think Gabi definitely did a lot for controlling Banana, controlling the series ordering, and kind of beating out Astralis here. So just going forward, a few things to note. I don't think Astralis is going... Like, if you're looking at Astralis and thinking this is a blueprint to beat them, it's not. Device isn't going to be that bad every game. I think it's more an outlier that when he's bad than it is the norm. Second thing you have to note is, if you're talking about tactics of that deep of level of something like Gabi compared to Glaive, like, here's the thing. I don't know how much Astralis prepared for Big, but even if they did prepare for Big, there isn't that much good data on them, because I don't think there's that much land data. So that's another thing to consider. Is I think Glaive gets stronger as an in-game leader the more information he has. So that's another thing to consider. Like, I don't even know if Gob would be able to outsmart him again in the same way, despite the fact that I respect Gob a lot. And here's the thing, I don't think a lot of in-game leaders could repeat this feat that Gob did on Inferno. Like, a few of them, I might give a few of them a chance to do it, but in general, I don't think most in-game leaders have that ability. And then the round ordering, I think there's only a few in-game leaders that can do round ordering quite that good, especially in the OT. So in general, like, well, basically that's it, right? So it's just stuff to watch out for, and you should look. And if for Big, I think going forward, I think their win conditions are still going to be the same. I think it's going to be tabseN, Xantares, and then Gabi's tactics. I think that about wraps it up. I'll see you guys later.